And welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific? It's brought to you, of course, by our sponsor, our producer, IEJ Media, and our sponsor, Power Group Asia. We will tell you more about them in due course. I am Ray Powell. I am in California, and I am a former military officer over in, not New York, but in Ireland. We have my co-host, Jim Caruso, the former diplomat. Jim, how is Ireland?
Top of the morning to you, Ray, as they say here, or maybe not, maybe just, Lucky Charms commercial. We're all well here. Good to see you.
All right, it's great to see you. And we have with us today another person in Europe. This is Shannon Brandao. She is an attorney. She is fluent in Mandarin. She is the founder of the popular China Boss Substack, and of course, her LinkedIn newsfeed with something like 25,000 followers. She provides analysis on China-related business, geopolitics, and policy development. Shannon, how are you? And we have a very intriguing lead-off question for you. Why should we care if America is turning inward as China seems to be pushing outward?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I am doing great. And yes, I am in Europe. I am coming to you from Southern Europe in Portugal, where I've been living for a few years. And I get to see outside the U.S. the way that perception becomes reality. So I think these are very important talking points. We start with that. Why should we care if America turns inward as China pushes out? Because the appearance of America turning inward is enough to push China out. It's actually a motivation, I would call it a form of emboldenment, if that's a word. It's certainly a motivation. So as the U.S. pulls away from the world, there is a couple of powers that would like to step into the void, but the one that has the most energy and the largest well of resources to do that would certainly be China. And so we see a lot of instances where China has pivoted very quickly to take advantage of certain situations. We also see instances where China didn't have to do much at all, and allies or middle sort of swing states might actually lean towards China just out of fear, uncertainty, and economic opportunity, a need for stability, which they think that China can provide. So there are many reasons why we should care. It does affect every single human being's daily life, whether people realize it or not, because our supply chains are in the Indo-Pacific. And if our supply chains are controlled by a power or a state that has a beef with us, then we don't get those critical minerals or those batteries or those things that we are used to seeing in our everyday lives. And so these are very, very important issues. And I realize that all issues are important to someone, but I feel like distance can sort of soften the impact where it shouldn't. And so we can talk more about that. I don't want to go on and spill too much in the first segment, but it's an incredibly interesting time. It's an incredibly dangerous time. We've seen a lot of activity on Russia's part crossing into NATO borders. That is certainly not random. That was a test. And so it is an interesting and a volatile time, and it's a time that we need to be very careful in how we are perceived.
So, Shannon, thanks for that. It was a very interesting article in Foreign Affairs just now which basically says what you're stating is a misperception of China, that China is in fact a status quo power and has no expansionist views. It wants to just secure its position domestically. It wants to secure its position in areas where it, quote, always had interests, whether it's Tibet or Xinjiang or the South China Sea for that matter. And it's this misunderstanding that's leading to greater tension between the US and China. If we just, understood their motivations better, then we could come to a better understanding and more world peace, and we're all saying kumbaya. So, what's your feeling about that?
Well, I'm not gonna sing Kumbaya. So, my feeling on that is that this is actually a very old argument. You can go on to the Chinese. I don't know that you'll be interested in doing this, but I do it. You can go on to the Chinese, the People's Republic of China Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you will get all of their positions from the time that they started logging them into the internet, if they didn't take them down for sensitivity reasons. And you can see that this this talking point, this argument goes back a very long way, and it's one of their official positions, right? So there is no, in my opinion, there's no truth to the fact that China is a status quo power. There is, however, truth in the claim that China is certainly interested in the nearer term goals of trying to be the dominant player in its backyard, trying to consolidate power, trying to have as much of the nine dash line as it can, of course. But no, the reason that I firmly disagree that China is a status quo power is because China is still under the rule of a communist party. It's not necessarily a communist system, but it's a communist party that was born out of a revolutionary military style command, and it's brittle in the way that totalitarian systems are brittle, and they're very paranoid to the point that in order to be safe, they have to push out and control everything in the entire world because they cannot compete otherwise. It's an outdated political system. It doesn't really work. And as the economy is taking a nosedive under Xi Jinping's leadership, and then on top of that, there are future problems with demographics, um, they began to get even more concerned about holding on to their ruling power. And as they get more concerned, they don't pull in, they push out. It's a little bit like Putin and Russia in that respect. So um, it's a need for survival, of fear so deep in the ruling families, the ruling aristocrats, if you will, the red aristocrats. It's an hereditary rule that's passed down, right? That's what it is now. And so there is this fear and this tension that if they don't control what's happening in the world, if they're not on top of it, they'll be under it. And so they pull in people like, they take over people like Jack Ma, who's trying to be a multinational business. They use their Belt and Road. The Belt and Road started off as just Chinese companies going out, and then they rebranded it into a Chinese, Communist Party tool, right? So that's how you need to see China is that in my opinion, it is not a status quo power because that would leave those ruling families too vulnerable um, to the folks like Jack Ma, even to their own, let alone Wall Street powers and Elon Musk and anyone else in the world that's very successful at what they do. And so they will fight until their dying breath to stay on top. And so, no, it's not a status quo power.
So, okay, so let's talk about a piece of that you sort of went through, which was this idea that China, and we've all, I think a lot of people have been having this discussion over whether China is peaking, has peaked, is now in decline. Where is China? Certainly China is propagating the message that China is still on the rise. It's basically its rise is continuing and inevitable. And they are certainly acting as if they are intending to continue rising. And yet you alluded to these economic problems, these debt problems, demographic problems that we also see sort of weighing them down. How do you assess China? Are they still a rising power? Are we at peak China? What do you think?
I think China is a rising military power because Xi Jinping modernized the military and they're putting so much of their resources into developing their military. Economically, it's very unclear. The that whole debate is from a market economics perspective, if you ask me. So, you've got your businesses want see a rising economic power, right? I don't know if that is the case anymore. There was a recent survey, the U.S. China Business Council, which very clearly demonstrated that businesses they're staying put. Some have left. They're staying put in China, but they are not investing. They are holding their money and they're using those funds to hedge elsewhere. So, I don't know what's going to happen with that if they're just ultimately going to start leaving. A lot of foreign companies have left, a lot of Chinese companies are trying to leave. Economically, China had a little bit of a boom period, but they started from from nothing, right? So they could only go up, right? And then we always cited the statistics that the Chinese government was giving us on economic growth. And I do agree that a lot of the times the growth was phenomenal. But whether or not it actually reached double digits or whatever, you can never really trust what's coming out of Beijing. Even Xi Jinping can't trust what's coming out of Beijing because, it's just someone trying to please a superior, and then that superior is trying to please another superior. There's no, and then they don't have very good accounting standards in China. So getting actual information, especially about something sensitive, politically sensitive, and the economy and its GDP and its growth is always has always been a very difficult thing to do. So China is developing. It is still developing. It's a developing country in many respects. Militarily, they have modernized tremendously. They've done a number of things that really shocked me. Xi Jinping was actually able to put those things into place. I can't, I'm not a military specialist, but I will say that they've done a lot. But no, I don't. I always saw China as a, a challenge to hit the number one spot in the world because it had the Chinese Communist Party that was getting in its way. The second that someone, for example, like Jack Ma becomes successful, they are then taken. Their businesses are nationalized. Now, I'm an attorney and I will debate all day long the different legal definitions for nationalization. You don't have to use the word nationalization to know when a company has been nationalized. It's all about control, ownership, legal ownership in a reform a former communist country that's still very much a dictatorship doesn't really mean anything. A piece of paper doesn't mean anything. It's all about control. So when you have the Chinese Communist Party controlling its greatest entrepreneurs, its greatest innovators, they always just seem to get in the way and undermine that innovation. China has talent. It could be phenomenal. It could rival the US. Um, but for, if you ask me, that party. I've always
All
felt
right.
that way.
So let's unpack that a little bit because I would argue that between Chinese domination of things like solar panels, uh, batteries, electric vehicles, shipbuilding, um, artificial intelligence, where they have apparently a competitor to US models. They seem to be going fine with whatever weird economic model they're using, throwing a lot of capital at winners and letting the winners compete against each other. So, yeah, maybe overall the economy isn't doing so well, but it seems sectorally they're highly competitive with the US. And maybe that's the goal, to have the high ground for new technology and let the rest work itself out.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, that is certainly Xi Jinping's policy. You do have that one area where he has, China is really run by small, well, the economy, the Chinese economy relies on its small and medium-sized enterprises. And the center, Beijing, and local governments are not doing anything for them, right? They're only supporting, they're only subsidizing these giants, which is why you have overcapacity. We can talk about that later. But the tech war with the United States, the tech competition with the United States, is how Xi Jinping believes that he's going to compensate for all of China's disadvantages, all of its vulnerabilities, its demographics problem. He's going to, it will blow your mind. Right now they have high youth unemployment, and yet they are building out automation systems in the manufacturing sector, state owned and important private suppliers. They're building out automation of those factories at a record pace, and so people are. I realize one reason is because they want to save on labor costs, but and then also Xi Jinping believes that they're not going to have enough labor going forward to keep those factories running. But at the same time, you've got a lot of upheaval. Um, so there is that. It reminds me, I just remember because I'm old. I remember watching, as a little girl, I was into sports, and I was particularly interested in gymnastics. I was a gymnast, and I watched Nadia Comaneci on television at the Olympics. I guess it was in Montreal, and I don't know. I was a little girl, baby. And, I remember following her career before I think before she left, ultimately she left. And it's that old Soviet style of we have to outcompete in the Olympics, and then we have to outcompete in certain tech fields, and then everything else is just left to almost rot or die. Um, and they're doing it, Xi Jinping is he has a PhD in Marxist Leninism, so it's similar. The difference, I guess, is that a lot of his best and most talented folks are bringing their, sometimes unwillingly, I suspect, are bringing their expertise and their knowledge, their know-how from Silicon Valley, from wherever the innovation hubs are all over the world, not just in the U.S. And they're bringing it back to China, and so yes, you are right that that is a place where he has a better shot of competing with the US, but there's also extraordinary corruption. It's a huge problem. There's my favorite example that I always point to because it's the easiest one. Financial Times did a really deep dive into the big fund, which was in a, it was just after the pandemic. It was corruption. The government, the central government, set up a big fund to help the AI, uh, to help finance AI innovation, and somebody disappeared with it. I don't know. I mean, maybe a lot of somebody's. We don't know. This is an endemic problem. It was in the Soviet Union as well. It's an endemic problem. The second you get enough access to a big pot of government money, somebody's taking from it, which dilutes the strength of the government's program, obviously. I still think Chinese engineers are very talented. I mean, we trained a lot of them, but then they also have decent programs also in China. So they are going, this is one area. I mean, what? China does not encourage critical thinking in anything besides, engineering, right? Anything that has to do with Xi Jinping's chosen fields, you can be a critical thinker in that as long as you don't, go too far from the party line. But they don't encourage any other subjects. So yeah, you're going to have much higher levels of ability and competition in those areas. But you've also got to offset that with the enormous corruption and just the drive, the industry itself starts the overcapacity problem where they start to sort of just price each other out of competition or undercut the prices so that even some of the better, more innovative companies are failing. Yeah, so you've got so many problems to offset the successes. It's an interesting dynamic for sure.
So this really brings us, I think, to a fascinating question that I don't think the US seems to have a singular answer to, and that is whether this is the time to engage with China to sort of draw them back into, the more of our community of nations to try to get, to make the big deal, right? To figure this thing out so that we can sort of settle everything back down. Or is it the time to, cut off Chinese students, to, further decouple the economy or de-risk the economy, as people might say? And it doesn't seem like the US has a single answer to that right now. It really depends on who's in front of the microphone and what day of the week it is. How is this affecting the people that you talk to about how they are making business decisions relating to the US and China?
Well, all businesses are hedging as much as they can, and that depends on what industry they're in. Uh, there are many different ways depending on your industry to hedge. You have to understand that when a business is in China, uh, it's no simple thing. They didn't get there in a simple way, and they can't leave in a simple way. So once they're in, there are deals to be made with the local cadres that for business licensing and uh, and China's a big country. Enforcement is different in different areas. Depends on who wants the promotion. So, um, but it's still not nearly as simple as just registering a business in the U.S. or in Europe. It really, if you're a foreigner doing business in China, you are still suspect, and you are still a essentially a tool to be used, and by the political establishment. So they have to make deals just to be there. And then, since the party controls all of the economic resources, they control the land, they control the supply chains. I mean, when I say control, they have, if, obviously they can't micromanage everything, but if there's something important, they get a say in how it goes. Absolutely. They decide how it goes. So they have the keys to the kingdom. The local officials have the keys to their kingdom, and it just goes on and on and on. And people will try to make the argument that happens in Western countries, but it's not a valid argument. It's a false comparison in so many ways. Um, so they've worked really hard just to get into China, with their Chinese dream of, a billion person market, right? And then they decided that the geopolitics is making it, and the tariffs, are making it unsustainable. Now they want to get out. Well, they can't necessarily just get out. If there's any wind whatsoever that they're going to leave, their employees will go straight to the local officials. My firm, you can talk to the head of our firm if you want. He's dealt with these issues, but I've talked to people who have been in these situations. Um, they are asked for phenomenal. I mean, basically, it's a shakedown. It's like, and it's, you can't leave. You know how with the exit bans and the this and the that, and I think I hesitate to say it, but if I'm not mistaken, I think a long time ago, maybe a European manager might have been killed or something like that by his employees because they thought that he wasn't going to pay them. And there have been instances where foreigners have just left without paying. So there's so much, tension between employees and their Western managers or their Western bosses, that the companies are terrified to upset their employees. So they have to leave very methodically and very quietly. So all of this, so it's really hard to even get a sense of what's happening with foreign businesses in China because they are not going to go on the record and telling everyone that they are leaving. So you have to start looking at where they're putting money in other ways to get a sense of how many people, how many firms are going. So
So are companies able
the impact. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
are companies still able to repatriate their profits to get employees in and out to, protect at least some aspects of their technology, or is that all ending?
When are you saying in the Western companies that are inside China, are they able to protect their IP? No.
They
A
can't
very
protect their
clear
IP.
no. No.
Can they repatriate their profits?
I think all of that, my lawyer answer is always it depends. It depends on their relationship with the local their local, tea drinking comrades, and then it depends, yeah, it just depends. It really depends. I think the more political pull they have, yes, if they have they're playing politics exactly like they're playing politics in the US and Europe. They're going to China, and it was easier for them before Xi Jinping. It's gotten a lot harder for them now. But they're going to China and they're lobbying because that's the only way to do it. You don't go to China and open up a multinational that's famous around the world and expect to be left alone. You just don't do that. That's the only way to do it. So they go to China, they lobby, they get in, they have protection, and until they don't, because the protection is always local, and the person protecting them can only protect them as long as they have protection. And when the top guy changes, then everything can change, and that's what's been happening under Xi Jinping. Yeah, including your Wall Street giants. It's been interesting to watch. Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so you teased out the overcapacity problem. Why is there an overcapacity problem, and is there a solution that you see Beijing pursuing to that overcapacity problem?
The overcapacity problem is because of subsidies. Subsidies are given for different reasons in China. They're given for different reasons across the world. They're not always given because Xi Jinping wants to compete with the US. They're not always given by Beijing. In fact, most subsidies come from the local officials. They come from the local governments. You've got counties, you've got villages, even you've got layers of administrative levels that get to decide what they're going to do with their budgets, and they decide based on political ambition if they're trying to please Xi Jinping in sitting high up in Beijing, but at the same time, they have control over the land that the licensings and the rents and even the supply chains, the way that goods are moved and services are done. So the subsidies are usually given at the local level, and there are so many. I would say most subsidies are granted between competing Chinese companies. So, one Chinese company will have more political power than another Chinese company, and with that political power, it's able to eke out, favoritism from the local officials, and they get subsidies that way. It becomes a problem for us when the subsidies are so overbearing, or there's so much, there's too much help, that over time you've built what are essentially, you can almost consider them monopolies in China, because maybe the Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei, 对, yeah, Ren Zhengfei. Maybe the founder of Huawei started off as a small guy, but he's no longer a small potato, right? So now he has tremendous power, to absorb all those subsidies and all that help, and he's competing with Xiaomi, with different telecommunication companies. He's expanded into other industries. He's competing with them. But because of his political power, he gets the bulk of the subsidies, or he'll get more than they do in many regards. And so then, they start to churn out. They've got all they need to drive their competitors. There is antitrust law in China, but law doesn't work well in China. And so you have a lot of monopolies, a lot of firms that look like either a monopoly, or they look like a duopoly, or just whatever the word is for a three made I don't know, triopoly, I don't know. So a lot of very, very, very big firms who have worked their way up to become protected at the national level. And so it's those firms, whether they're in the EV industry, or the solar panels, or steel. I googled a list. It's shocking, the number of industries. People don't think about it. We only hear about electrical vehicles, but it's much, much more expensive than that. Obviously, there's renewables. There's heavy industry. There's steel, aluminum, cement, glass. All of these industries have been over subsidized to the point where now they have to drop their prices, but they start in China. And when the market is tapped out with their products, that's when they go abroad. So what we're seeing now is because China has already been oversaturated with these products for years. It's not the past 6 months, it's not 1 or 2 years. They've been oversaturated with these products for probably 5, 6, 7 years. And so they need new markets. And that's why they're going abroad, and Xi Jinping is even helping them to go abroad, right? That's what good leaders, I suppose, do. So, but it will blow your mind. It's not, you've got container ships. They are overproducing container ships. They are overproducing telecom gear, smartphones. They're overproducing plastics, fertilizers, overproducing construction equipment, refrigerated containers, um, aquaculture equipment, and seafood. It's a very, very large problem, broad and deep.
And wasn't Belt and Road Initiative initially meant to export this excess capacity? That was the goal, and it's turned more
No,
into a political tool as well.
the Belt and Road is actually, so China had different, everything is very top down until but that's actually misleading as well. Mm. So the Belt and Road, so China had an internal policy of go out, but go out and go west was sort of inside China. So I think when they said go out, they meant go outside the post Mao traditional coastal region of development. They wanted the leaders before Xi Jinping wanted to try to push development also inland because there was becoming this unsustainable economic divide, income division between the coastal regions and inland China. So it sort of started a very long time ago, right after Deng, I think, with people pushing, officials pushing, wanting a piece of the action, wanting Chinese companies and foreign companies to develop the interior of China more. Xinjiang really got into that, and I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. That's unreal. This is something you really should look into. It's extraordinary. I think I want to write a book about it. It's unbelievable what the paramilitary leaders of Xinjiang have managed to do. They are extremely powerful. Obviously, Xi Jinping has to answer to them in some cases. So, um, so that started as that kind of thing going out, and then China slowly began to realize that it had products that it could ship abroad. It didn't always need to just manufacture inside, and then let foreign companies do the exporting. They wanted that piece of the action, and so they began, and rightfully so. I mean, people come to your country and then they just make the products and they ship it out. You'd like to be able to do that also and get a piece of that market. So that's I think that really started probably that started before the Belt and Road. They began to export the Belt and Road. I always saw as China's state-owned industries when the construction industries, the real estate sector, um, because real estate was so oversaturated again in China, they needed to develop. They needed a market for their services and their products, and they began to press the Chinese government. These are state-owned companies, and so it benefits, Beijing. They began to press Xi Jinping, or well, I guess even before Xi Jinping, they began to press the Chinese government to represent them abroad. And so they began to get this was long before it was even called the Belt and Road. And then so they started going out in this way. I think it was called the go out strategy. And then somebody Wang Huning, the skinny guy with the glasses, that's kind of quiet, always clapping at Xi, and he's a little bit nerdy, but he's the one that everyone calls as the Chinese Machiavelli, which I'm not sure is a good description, but um, it has really uh, helped with the framing of a lot of Xi Jinping's signature policies. And the Belt and Road, as far as I know, is his idea, although he could have stolen it from somebody. But it was already in existence, and then the Chinese government, the central government, got behind it and developed it and pushed it a lot further when they saw that they could use it geostrategically.
All right, Shannon. So this time has gone really fast.
I'm
So I'm going to get
sorry.
to you to no, it's okay. It's been fascinating. I want to get you to an exit question. So
Yeah.
uh, let's have some fun. I'm going to give you a red phone. All right. You know that Donald Trump is gearing up for APEC, and he's planning to meet with Xi Jinping. And fortunately, he has decided to reach out to you, and you've got about 2 minutes to tell him what he should know before he meets with Xi Jinping in South Korea. So, in your 2 minutes, what would you like to tell him?
I would like to say that Xi Jinping will be very happy to flatter him, will be very happy to tell him everything he wants to hear, but that is not necessarily the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is that we are at a bit of a crossroads in terms of geostrategy and geopolitics. And if we don't continue to press our interests in the Indo-Pacific especially, but everywhere, then China will step in to fill the vacuum. Um, I wrote, I think was last week, 2 weeks ago in my newsletter, about the Silk Road Arc. That's the hospital ship that is sailing, throughout Latin America, the waters, and making a number of calls. That is supposed to be a hospital ship, but it's actually a naval ship. It belongs to the Ministry of Defense in China was the one that even made the announcement, and the announcement was made within days of a leaked draft. We don't know exactly what's in the leaked draft, but it's a leaked draft of the national defense strategy for 2026. I think they come out every 4 years. And that strategy, we got word from Politico. We don't know exactly what's in the strategy, but it seems to be a historic pivot away from pushing our interests, defending our interests overseas to drawing inward and protecting just the physical homeland borders, apparently. But that's not going to be good enough. And if you like buying things on the store shelves, then you need to understand that most of what you're buying is being transited through the Indo-Pacific, and it's those shipping lanes that China will be able to call the shots on, just like it called the shots on the critical minerals about 2 months ago when they implemented export curbs, and Ford Motor, a number of other auto manufacturers were begging the the government for help and support because they had about 2 weeks supply before they needed to shut their factories down in Michigan in the US. So that's what I would say.
All right. Well, fortunately, he's taking all your advice, and he's very excited to go off and implement the Shannon Brandao. By the way, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
My husband is Portuguese. I am not, so it's Brandao, but
Brandao.
I'm not yeah, I'm not a
All right.
fluent Portuguese
Well, the
speaker,
Shannon
so I
Brandao plan. So, Shannon, how can people find your work? How can people follow you? What would you recommend?
well, I'd love to see you on my interacting with the news feed at LinkedIn. I do a lot of posting there. But I write a weekly newsletter at China Boss News on Substack, and I've been doing that for 4 years now. And I work very hard at it to bring you a very global view of what's happening with China, business, and geopolitics. So if you are interested, please head on over there, and you've got paid and free subscriptions available.
All right. Well, the China boss, Shannon Brandao, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you on again.
That was great to see you guys. Thank you.
And of course, our sponsor for today, as every day, is Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. Jim Caruso, my co-host, is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and you should go and visit their website at bauergroupasia.com. Well, Jim, it's always you brought up that foreign affairs article, and it's always a question of how much of what China says, and then how much of it that seems to be kind of repeated out into the international media. How much do we take at face value? And those are the authors of that article said, well, you should take a lot of it at face value. They've been saying it for a long time. This is not new. And then how much should we just say, though, that's propaganda? That's what they want you to think.
Well, we heard a lot of this from certain parties when we were in Australia that, China is a rising power. It needs its space, however they define that, and that we're just trying to keep them down because we want to be hegemons. And that argument gathers certain weight among the chattering classes in advanced countries, but also in China's neighbors. And we've discussed this before. If your biggest economic partner is China, you don't want to rock the boat
Yeah.
and you'd like to believe the best.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I'm
one of the
concerned
things
you're
that
failing to compete.
that strikes me is, while we may have a lot of, what we would call party propaganda that goes out from the Republicans to the Democrats, or the different interests here, we don't have a ministry of propaganda. And, which is, of course, in China is a very large and powerful entity. And so there is an entire uh, sort of power center in Beijing committed to this task of telling the world the story that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party want told. And I think that should never be very far from our minds. Now, that doesn't mean they get to tell the entire story. And that doesn't mean that they are all powerful. They are certainly not. But they are certainly extremely well resourced, and they are extremely focused on making sure that certain stories do get told.
Well, and this is, as we discussed, why we've unilaterally disarmed our information branch of government by defunding Radio Free Asia and Voice of America to not just counter the Chinese propaganda, but to get out facts,
Yeah.
verifiable facts.
Yeah.
And without that, some listeners aren't going to know what truth is.
Yeah. Obviously there's, the extent to which Voice of America, Radio for Asia, they certainly had a tiny fraction of the resources, or had even at their peak had just a tiny fraction of the resources that, say, the Ministry of Propaganda does. But I think that they also, they benefited from the fact that ultimately people do at some level process the fact that America is a free society. Even so, I think, I just having spent enough time in this world of, reading Chinese propaganda, interacting with Chinese propaganda, not just here in the United States, but in other countries, it does reach a lot of people. And there are television channels and social media channels and other and the Chinese diaspora, which is a major target of Chinese propaganda. To a lot of these groups and entities only get Chinese propaganda, and a lot of them get a whole lot of it, even if they do get other sources of information.
Well, if you remember in Australia, all the Chinese language newspapers and most of the radio stations were owned by entities from China,
Yeah,
often controlled by the party. So yeah, it's a problem, and Chinese propaganda is effective because they
yeah,
keep repeating, "We are peaceful. We are your biggest customer. We are not like the Americans asking you to do things you don't want to do. Come play with us."
yeah. Well, I almost once got to visit China, and I blew it. So, and the reason I say I blew it is because, given my international profile, I will probably not get to do it now. In other words, I've sort of made trips to China too difficult and probably too risky to my own personal health and safety, and freedom of movement to be able to carry out. But it was in 2015 when we planned, and this wasn't even sort of the mainland China. This was just Hong Kong, back before the real big crackdown on Hong Kong. And I had planned a trip from Hanoi, where I was stationed at the embassy there, with my wife, and my two kids were going to come and go with me to Hong Kong. And so we planned this for months, and I had bought non-refundable tickets because I was cheap. I got a non-refundable hotel rooms, but we had it all planned out. And when my kids got to Hanoi and we all got together, on a particular day before we left, I was on my way to work at the embassy, and I said, "Hey, the new Star Wars movie is out. I'm gonna go ahead and take my scooter to work at the embassy today instead of riding the shuttle. That way I can leave early, and we can all go and see the new Star Wars movie," which, of course, wasn't worth seeing. But, so on my way to work that morning, I was in La La Land thinking of something else, and I forgot the one cardinal rule of driving in Hanoi, which is to be paranoid 100% of the time, right? If you look around, what you'll see is people who have become accustomed to focusing like a laser on exactly what's happening in front of you. Nobody looks to the side or the back. Everybody just looks straight forward and is ready for anything. and I was thinking about something else. And so all of a sudden, this little car appeared in front of me at unexpectedly, which is actually a contradiction in terms because the unexpected should be expected in Hanoi. There is this law of the jungle there where one of the laws is, or one of the rules, unwritten rules is anybody will do anything at any time. And so I had the gall to be surprised. And that caused me to, rather than just slow down and let the car adjust, it caused me to panic and swerve. And I wrecked the bike, broke an arm and a leg, had to be medevaced to Bangkok, and ruined my chance to go to Hong Kong with my family. And the one of the codas to this story is that years later, I was talking to my son, and he said, "Yeah, we had that chance to go to Hong Kong, and you got in that accident. We never got to go." And I said, "I remember talking to you from the hotel room, saying you can use the tickets. The tickets are you and your sister can go to Hong Kong anytime you want." Use these tickets, use the hotel room. It's all paid for. You should go. And you and your sister said, "Nah, it's okay." And he said, "What?" I said, "That's exact. I could probably go back and find the emails." And he said, "How could I have been such an idiot?" I said, "Look, yeah, I take the fifth on that one, but that was the time I almost went to China."
Well, Hong Kong and China, I think, are still, certainly at that time, 2 different things,
Yeah,
and you missed out because Hong Kong was great.
yeah. I did miss out, and I really regret it. So one thing I don't regret is that we have as our producer Ian Ellis Jones and his company IEJ Media. If you're interested in them, you should certainly follow him at Ian Ellis Jones on X. He produces these fantastic military and geopolitical graphics that are much in demand and much repeated around the internet. Of course, if you enjoyed this episode, you should go and subscribe and like. I should say that again. You should subscribe, either whether it be on your audio streaming platform, iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, or on YouTube, which is youtube.com at IP Podcast. Let's get those subscription numbers up because we like it and you'll like it, we promise. You can also follow us on social media that we've got on X or on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, any of those. Email us Indo-Pacific Podcast at gmail.com. We read a whole bunch of your emails during our 100th anniversary episode, which was a lot of fun. Indo-Pacific Podcast at gmail.com. And of course, finally, you can always visit our sponsor, and you should, BauerGroupAsia.com, especially if you're looking at trying to do business in the Indo-Pacific in this kind of business environment. So for Jim and Ian, I'm Ray, thanking you for joining us this time on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific.